As I mentioned, I want to talk to my good friend, the Reverend Dr. Jerry Grimes, about just kind of what the church, and in this instance, it's going to be more the black church, but I know that there have been churches around the country that have been responding to the Kirk killing in large part because it was so public and he was so tied to this president. And it was something that this was not an activist in a lone corner of the country. This was something that was live streamed that everybody found out about and many people saw. Dr. Grimes, thank you for joining me on News Radio KDK. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you? Thank you so much for having me.
No problem at all. Let me go to this first. When it comes to the responsibility of the church to talk about something like this, what are the guidelines that they should be considering? Because, there was one point in time where people were saying, well, the church shouldn't be involved in political matters. And then you had, basically this finding or this interpretation earlier this year that says, hey, churches can be political now. And now people are frustrated with some of the things that have been said by some of the preachers last Sunday, just mere days, 4 days. Actually, the fourth day after the shooting and killing of Charlie Kirk. What's the obligation, generally speaking? I know you're not trying to critique your peers, but generally speaking, what's the obligation? What's the walk that a pastor has to be mindful of?
So I also wanted to say, in addition to saying thank you for the opportunity, also hello to your audience and to your listeners and to everyone in the area as well. And I pray that all is well and that everyone's doing well. And in the midst of what I'm sure is a difficult time for many of us, albeit in different ways, but at the same time, I just wanted to say hello and blessings to your listening audience as well. I would answer this in two ways. So first, I would make it very specific to me. So I am not only a Baptist, but I'm what is known as a missionary Baptist, which is a very specific kind of Baptist. Kind of the 30-second history of how my denomination within the larger denomination came to be. It was one of the few mainline Protestant denominations that allowed people of African descent to attend service during the antebellum period. They were not allowed to be active in service. Typically, they were restricted to the balcony or the basement of the edifice, but they were allowed to participate on some level. And this combined with what were called the brush arbor services, secret worship services that were more expressive, that interpreted the life of Jesus in a way that spoke more to the condition of desiring liberation from what was at that time physical enslavement. And so after the Civil War, there became this focus of first being a missionary to one's neighbor and then being a missionary to the world, drawn very deeply from the Acts of the Apostles, this notion of beginning first with Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, then the world. So proverbially starting with your neighbor, your neighborhood, your larger community, and then foreign missions. So our doctrine has been guided by something that has fallen into disuse over the past 50 years, sadly. But in the 1850s, specifically 1859, we saw the emergence of what was called the Hiscox Manual, Hiscox, the Hiscox Manual. It's a very exhaustive manual about specific things to do in specific occasions. I realize that unlike our Catholic brothers and sisters, which are more or less known for having a very rigorous liturgy and lectionary and so forth, Baptists do have certain articles of faith and creedal statements to which we are beholden, but unfortunately the autonomy of the denomination allows for a lot of different interpretations and sometimes an outright abandonment of many of these rules. And so in an instance like this, in the tragic murder of Charlie Kirk, and certainly our prayers and condolences go to, again, his family, there is a general rule strongly implied and normally followed, at least for a century, strongly followed, and again, has fallen into disuse. And I would say this year particularly, I've seen it sadly fall into disuse to the point of disappearing. that when someone passes, there should be a time period of 2 Sundays from the time in which the committal is administered. As you may know, and there may be different names for it, but essentially the committal are the last words that you say when a body is lowered into the ground, or when someone's remains are laid to rest, whether it be the spreading of ashes or the body being placed into the ground. And that there should be 2 Sundays following that before anyone outside of the immediate family, specifically the immediate family, says anything publicly, unless the immediate family has given permission to that person. Of course, in my case, I'm typically the person delivering the eulogy and speaking on behalf of the family, but I'm entrusted with, and I am charged with that duty. Not even the extended family is granted that privilege unless, again, expressly given that authority by the immediate family. Of course, most of the world is not Baptist. But even, sadly, within the Baptist denomination, even as I'm saying this, there are many Baptists, unfortunately, they've never read the Church Members Guide from the early 1930s. Certainly probably do not have at their disposal a copy of the Hiscox Manual. Probably have not read the Articles of Faith in the back of the hymnal in quite some time. There are actual hard and fast rules for clergy, for ordained clergy, about these types of instances.
So I see where you're going with it, but before we go to break, I'm gonna have you come back on the other side of the news as we're hitting halftime of the show. But the question I want to ask you, and I'm going to keep the phone lines open, 866-391-1020 as well, is this. So you're giving us the dogmatic approach of what these preachers were probably guided to do, especially if they're Baptist. But then the question becomes, if you're in the tradition of civil rights activists and a preacher in America, what's your obligation now? Is it good or not good for them to be so politicized? Is this a good thing or a bad thing? Are they stepping up? There are people such as the Reverend Jamal Bryant, who led and is still leading the Target boycott, who also was one of those preachers that spoke out last Sunday. So I want to talk about that and their role in speaking out, both as men of the cloth, but also as leaders within our society. We'll talk about that with the Reverend Dr. Jerry Grimes after the news on News Radio KDK. All right, I'm coming back. It's me, Lenny McAllister. Second half of the show, I'm still talking to my friend, the Reverend Dr. Jerry Grimes. He of the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and Peter's Tabernacle of North Carolina. Dr. Grimes, let's leverage the difference between the obligation that a minister would have as a man of the cloth versus an American preacher, where there's a tradition from abolition all the way through to today for preachers to speak on current events and contextualize it into what the Christian lifestyle should be. And how does this all play in with the sermons we heard from last week?
I would say a part of that tradition is, and perhaps you may know the answer to this. Are you familiar with Reverend Jackson's statement? As I know that you've had a long working relationship and friendship with him, and perhaps he has discussed this with you. I'd be curious to know. But are you familiar with the statement that Reverend Jackson made after the attempt on the life of George Wallace?
Remind me.
He never made a statement.
Oh yeah, that would be the reason why.
Mm-hmm.
He focused on the work. I mean, he focused on the work. That was, and look, I remember, I can tell you this, and it's interesting you to bring this up, Dr. Grimes, because I remember working with him during the whole shebang-a-bang, to quote Dave Chappelle, concerning the aftermath of the Trayvon Martin situation. And there was a lot of, commentary and statements coming out of National Action Network, which is Al Sharpton's organization, and I asked him, do you want Rainbow Push to say something? Do you want to have a statement? And what he said, and people would not believe this, and I've told family members this statement, and they were like, Jesse Jackson said that? I said, yes. The statement he made was, listen, you can't sing every song, and you can't dance on every stage. And I was like, what? He's like, Mr. Lenny, you can't perform on every stage and can't sing every song. Sometimes it's okay to not sing anything. And for the image that people have of Reverend Jackson who they like to call, and look, and again, we were talking about, it wasn't that long ago, free speech allowed you to call Jesse Jackson an ambulance chaser and call him a poverty P word, which I hate that phrase, but that was fair game just 15 years ago. That was his statement on making statements at certain times. Can't be on it. You can't dance on every stage. You can't sing every song. So to your point, there were instances where he said nothing.
And may I ask you, in what denomination was Reverend Jackson?
I believe he's Baptist, but he prayed. I mean, yeah. So there you go.
So you see, and Dr. King, after the assassination of John F. Kennedy, the position, what makes a tradition strong is that it's withstood things. And the tradition is always you offer condolences to the family. And if you are going to say anything beyond that, 2 Sundays until the body has been placed in the ground, out of respect for the family and those who are mourning, because then your faith is positioned where it should be, above society, above culture. I've said this in the pulpit because it's true. On more than one occasion, I've had long conversations with members of the Ku Klux Klan. I've known they were Klansmen, and expressed to them, you have every right to wear sheets and burn crosses. And I would still never want any harm to come to you. My only concern is this: you do not have the right to put a noose around my neck because you believe that I don't have the right to exist, when God has obviously spoken otherwise, because I exist. But if we can't have the conversation, then we can't reach a point in which the children and grandchildren of said Klansmen and my children would reach a point in which they will look back on earlier times, almost astonished that something as simple as an epidermal layer kept us from recognizing one another's humanity. In terms of specifically what has happened with my peers, as I've expressed to you, I find myself in not a quandary, in that I am confident in the Lord where I am in this position. I'm in academia. I am steeped in practical theology. I've delivered more eulogies than I care to count, yet I can count every one of them, and I remember every name and every face and every family. I'm also, as you know, I have a political background. I'm only one phone call away in this entire situation from someone on every side of this argument.
And I remind the audience who does not know you as well as I do, obviously, is a former congressional candidate out of North Carolina. Go right ahead.
Mm-hmm. To your point about current events, I have simultaneously been critical of policy decisions made by President Trump, and one can easily find sermons in which I've said in the same sermon and repeatedly, when I heard about the attempt on his life, my first thought is, what about Barron? Second thought, what about Melania? Third thought, Don Jr., Eric, Laura. I care about people's families, which tragically reaches a point of becoming unpopular because some people have the luxury of not having to serve a constituency. And then some other leaders have a constituency that demands certain things of them, in which, and I do know this has happened to some of my peers in the past few days. If certain comments in a certain direction were not forthcoming and forcefully, Brother Lenny, some preachers don't want to drive an outdated Camry like me. They need their Cadillac. Some preachers don't want to live in 1,400 square feet like me with 5 degrees. They want to live in at least 10,000 square feet with 2 degrees. They meet with their boards and they view being a pastor as a career. I said this morning during a very bizarre sermon, and I say very bizarre because you would almost not know that the world is in as tense of a place as it is from the sermon, because I felt what the people needed was something lighthearted today in the midst of everything, which is, and my congregation knows, I am accountable to the one that all of us will see when we leave here. And most people, and this is not for me, in the sense of a situation like this, I'm not a civilian. And what I mean by that is, most people have never considered that caskets come in different sizes because they've never had to deliver a eulogy. They've never had in 1 week 5 different families ask them to escort them to the morgue to identify their loved ones. They've never had to consider over the course of a day how they would deliver 3 different messages for 3 people who've left this world in 3 different ways. And that is a part of their life. I go on vacation and I have to leave vacation because someone is on the verge of taking someone else's life and taking their own. That's been every day of my life since I've been to the ministry. Most people will never know that existence. I don't even know what a weekend is.
So let me ask you this question. Let me ask you this question because I know I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole that you're giving us a lot to chew on, but I'm going to take it back to these other ministers. And again, with a context and with a parameter of not trying to critique them in a negative way, but just to try to understand what they're doing. So with all that said, because I'd have to imagine that these other pastors do the same exact thing. If that is the case, then what is the balance that they could have, should have, will have, you will eventually have when it comes to talking about these things moving forward? Because Jimmy Kimmel, the issue with Jimmy Kimmel's not going away. The issue with Colbert's not going away. The satire with South Park is not going away. The protests are not going away. We have elections coming up in Virginia and New Jersey that are going to be there soon enough. As it is, we have a president that's continuing to expand presidential powers and shrink, in many instances, congressional and judicial powers. What's the obligation of people, and I only have a couple minutes left, what's the obligation of people in your lane to both be the man of cloth, perhaps follow tradition, especially in an instance like this, yet at the same exact time lead people secularly through the prism of Christianity?
Each leader, and I can't account for how God is leading them, but they have their constituency. They have individuals to whom they are committed.
But I'm not gonna let you go there. I'm not letting you go down there. So I'm gonna ask you very specifically. I'm gonna clarify what I'm saying by saying this. What is one way they can do it properly, or one way that you all can do it properly, aside from the need to appease or satisfy a constituency, to do things the right way that would make sense historically, not just contemporarily?
This is where being rooted in the New Testament becomes critical, to ask themselves the simple question. In this instance, so whatever the instance is, what position, to the best of their ability as they understand Scripture, as they understand the situation, what position would Jesus take specifically in each issue? And communicate that not only to their congregation, but period. And for me, for 22 years, that has always been the beginning, middle, and end of it. To the best of my human ability and my frailty, what position would Jesus take in this? It's really that simple. Because what I see, sadly, everywhere, practically, there are exceptions. I will say, I was listening and I was emboldened to hear that your leaders in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania have taken very strong moral positions against violence, but also for solidarity. But in each instance, Jesus says something about people having the right to say certain things. And if we disagree with them, we have a conversation. We don't hit, we don't strike, we don't engage in retaliatory action. We leave vengeance for the eternal. In each instance, that's what they have to do. But there's a huge difference between leading a boycott, which is a matter of let your yes be yes and let your no be no. If you've taken a certain position to do something as a business and a company, then you reverse that without having a conversation with the community with whom you made covenant. That's also different than the decorum and decency needed to allow people to grieve and to understand that people are hurting. It's multifaceted, but in each instance, there is a rooting and a guidance in terms of Jesus would say this, or as close as we can approximate, would say this about this. That's what has to go forth. But of course, with that, we also understand what that cost him to do that. And so that's what I would say. That's the obligation to do what he would do.
The Reverend Dr. Jerry Grimes, you will hear more of him on these airwaves over the coming months, especially as we start getting into the holy seasons towards the end of the year. I always appreciate your confluence of faith and history and philosophy and politics. Dr. Grimes, thank you as always, for joining me here on News Radio KDKA.
Thank you so much. God bless you.
God bless you as well.